nai. Nai anani nai nai anai anani nai nai yanai anani nai nai anani nai 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 yanai anani nai nai ani nai 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 yanai anai yai anani nai nai anani nai 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 anani nai nai nani nai 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 na na nai nai anani nai nai nani nai 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 yanai anani nai nai yanai anani nai nai yanai anani nai nai nani nai 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 yanai anani nai nai yanai anani nai nai yanai anani nai nai ani nai 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 yai anani nai nai ani nai 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 anai na na nai nai anani nai nai nani nai 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 anani nai nai ani nai 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 na na nai nai anani nai nai ani nai 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 nai.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Wilderness Torah's virtual village. My name is Sarah Elise, and I'm the Operations and Community Programs Manager, Operations and Special Projects Coordinator here at Wilderness Torah. As part of our Awakening the Earth-Based Traditions of Judaism, Wilderness Torah creates village life during not only our immersive land-based festivals such as Passover in the Desert, by uplifting and encouraging the individual gifts of the collective community. But we are now also, and have been for quite some time now, doing this virtual village 4 times a week. And you can learn with Wilderness Torah community members who are sharing their gifts, as well as longtime stakeholders in the Earth-Based Judaism movement. If this is your first time at Wilderness Torah, we welcome you, whether you're watching here on Zoom or on Facebook Live. And it's so great to see a number of familiar faces back here again. We are committed to keeping Virtual Village accessible and free. If you'd like to support Wilderness Torah in this effort, we welcome any and all donations, large or small, as we endeavor to provide Jewish wisdom and community building through this hard time. If you are new to Wilderness Torah or would like to find out more about what we do and how to get involved, my peer Malka will put the link to our website and donation page into the chat right now. The session is being recorded and also is being live streamed to Facebook. You can check out our uploaded recorded sessions about a week after they happen, and we have all of our offerings on our website, so you can check there for those if you missed anything. Now I'm pleased to turn it over to our very own Rabbi Zeli Golden. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sarah Elise, for holding the space here, and thank you for Malka for helping make things happen here. And it's great to be back. This is our second to last week with Virtual Village, and it's been an amazing run, and it's great to see a lot of new people here today. So it's a practice to sort of open the space by, welcoming people. And I'd like to see if maybe 3 or 4 people would like to volunteer to say, "Hi, my name is. I'm calling in from, and I'm grateful for, or I'm interested in this topic because." And it's a really short one, It's like we're gonna do this for like 3 minutes, and then we're gonna move on. So, is any volunteers to offer a, "Hi, my name is. I'm calling in from, and I'm excited to be here because," or "I'm grateful for"? Reb Seidel.
Hi, good morning. It's good to be with you. I'm in Portland. I just had a grandbaby a few days ago, first one. So my daughter gave birth. She was born in Berkeley a few minutes ago, and now I'm a granddaddy, a Zayda.
Wow,
I'm grateful to be here to be with you, brother, my colleague. I've been interested in Earth Torah for about 60 years, since I was a little kid. And like a lot of you, got into Earth Torah. My dad got me into Earth Torah in the forest, wilderness, all over America. He took us all over the country to wilderness. So it's delightful to be here. Mazel tov on this whole program.
It's an honor to have you here, Rabbi Jonathan Seidel. Thank you for being here. Anyone else? Judy. Start again, Judy. We need to unmute you first. Can someone unmute Judy?
Judy, there you go. I think we need to ask you to unmute and you have to accept it.
How's that?
Yes.
So I'm Judy Vida. I'm in Walnut Creek, California. I'm a big fan and I'm grateful to be here today, but also I just went swimming for the first time in many months.
Mazel
Grateful for that.
Tid Chadesh may be renewed. And one more person. Frank. Let's help get Frank unmuted.
I'm grateful for the amazing programming that we were able to find in the last 3 months. It's just amazing Jewish programming that it's been very good.
Welcome, great to have you here. All right. And I just saw my friend Cerise Schachter join from Ashland, Oregon, and many great people in this room. Welcome, everybody. So today we're going to take a little journey into a dip into history, I would say, and a look into the intertext. You know, what is hidden inside of what the text is saying. The title of this class is From Goddess Worship to Patriarchy, the Monotheistic Revolution. And there seems to be some interest in this topic. So I would love for people to begin by maybe throwing in the chat, why are you interested in this topic? And this will help me feel you in the room and also help me guide how I orient myself towards teaching this. I have a source sheet. We're going to go through it. We're going to look at some really interesting pieces that illuminate the goddess roots, the goddess worshiping roots of the ancient Israel traditions. But I'm curious why you're interested in that. In the chat, if you don't mind, just a word or two, like what compels you to come? And also to ask the question, if you want to say, like, is this new to you? Are you shocked? Or are you like, oh, I know this, but I want to just hear what you have to say about it? You know, I'm interested in that as well. Abra says, to know the truth about our heritage. Julien says, I'm interested in pre-Judaic Hebrew polytheism and want to cultivate a relationship with our most ancient pantheon. Wonderful, Julien, thank you. Jonathan Seidel, I'm interested in seeing how you understand how a share might be hidden in our texts. Janelle, so much of Judaism feels deeply feminine to me, and especially from an earth-based lens, so I'm curious. Elizabeth, I feel a rise in feminine energy today. Yes, we'll talk about that. Fregel, if I pronounce that correctly, reclaim pagan practices that are specific to Judaism or that Judaism directly came from. Noosh, patriarchy, nature of Judaism, and my inability to relate to that. Beautiful. So we're going to talk about patriarchy and where it came from, and we'll spend a little bit of time about the emergent feminine energy and what we're doing with that. Jonathan first, Magid says, Jew witches represent. Amen. And Sia or Chia, I want to hear what you have to say compared to what I wrote in the Miriam tradition. Beautiful. Izzy Star, as a non-binary person, the patriarchal aspects of Judaism are really alienating. Amy Kaplan, as a woman, I always feel like Judaism didn't include me. Then I read the Hebrew Goddess and learned otherwise. Yes, we may touch on Patai's work, or Patai's work is inside of what we're talking about today. Rosa Bloomfield, as a native Jew, I'm interested in figuring out how these two parts of my identity fit together. Thank you. Vanessa, curious what is within our roots to move past the patriarchy. Amen. Angel Dawson, I am not Jewish, but I'm very curious about all earth-based goddess systems. I'm coming from a background in curiosity about non-dualistic tantra and paganism. Thank you. Judy, love the earth and nature-based for all holidays. Catherine, hadn't thought of Judaism as having roots in goddess worship, though I read about the end of human sacrifice. Nice. Cerise, welcome. So important to examine how monotheism arose and how it went down. 2 men in the Torah were already resisting that. Can't wait to hear about it. Okay. Tom, I feel my own naches that the divine oneness contains all gender identities and simultaneously beyond gender identities. Amen. Janine, since Judaism evolved in such a strong patriarchal framework, I'm interested in giving voice to the goddess and feminine voice. Amen, Jane. Thank you. Daniel Barchenko from Cincinnati, interested in diving into the ancient roots of our tradition. Amen. Cerise corrects herself. Women, not 2 men. Amen. Frank Schwartz, the lunar calendar gives us the sense of the feminine in our early tradition. Wow, I think we could just wrap it up right here, because that was very powerful. I feel like we taught a whole class on just from our own yearnings, and our own proclivities. And everything that you said resonates with me. So to say that from my perspective, by way of beginning this hour together, it is very clear that we are in a great shift of human consciousness, that we're going through a cosmic shift in the cosmos, and things are changing. Today, obviously, with the coronavirus and with the explosion of Black Lives Matter in the face of police brutality and the rising up of a new civil rights movement. Amy Kaplan says the age of Aquarius. And yes, Reb Zalman in his Paradigm Shift book says that this time is characterized by a shift from what you might consider the Piscean age, the Aquarian age. That the 2,000-year epoch of Pisces, characterized by duality, man-woman, right-wrong, on-off, control, lack of control, that this is shifting now into the Aquarian age, which is characterized by more of a unity consciousness and non-dual consciousness, with several of you named already in your interest in this work. So if we consider the evolution of human consciousness, and then the evolution of Jewish and pre-Judaic traditions, ancient Israel or the Hebrew traditions, within that movement through time, we can track how things have changed. And so the last 2,000 years is characterized by the rabbinic tradition. It's characterized by a male-dominated system of, you might say, the use of intellect and through spirit to really, I would say, as a survival strategy during these last 2,000 years, right, at the beginning of the exile, the second exile, but really a very strong exile. And so I am not here necessarily to judge any aspect of our tradition, but to name what has happened. So in 70 CE, the Common Era, the Second Temple fell, and Yochanan ben Zakkai and a group of sages, all men, in this Piscean way, gathered together in Yavne, near the Mediterranean coast of what we now call Israel, and the rabbinic tradition was born. And you can say this was a move. Frank says the Talmudic era parallels the subordination of the feminine in Christian tradition. Yes, it does. And we're going to look at the whole rabbinic project, and actually what comes before the rabbinic project, which is what I'm calling patriarchy, is forming that. Prior to this period, however, we have we're speaking in broad swaths of history right now, but we have the kingships, and we have a political map already and shifting and changing in the Levant, and you have monotheism, the kingships rise and fall, and prior to that, we have what you might call polytheism, polytheistic worship and goddess worship. Now, for most traditional Jewish people, and certainly for traditional rabbis, you would characterize Judaism as a monotheistic tradition. How many agree with that statement that Judaism is a monotheistic tradition? And I think it's true that as practiced now and for the last henotheistic, I'm curious what you mean by that, Julian, but we're going to continue on for now. Yes, and Elohim is plural. So Abra's already bringing up that we see the polytheistic roots sort of already showing up in the language. Like the word Elohim is a word for God, but of course, when we have a word im, it's a plural word. So Elohim is a plural description of a God. So we're already seeing this show up. Well, what is who might you say is the beginning of the monotheistic tradition? Who is attributed, let's say it that way, with the beginning of the monotheistic tradition in the Jewish conception? Which person? So Maggid first says Abe, and then says Noach. And Abe, I think you mean Abraham, King Hezekiah. So now we're going through history already. So let's look into the sources. I love this. This is amazing. All right. Are we looking at from goddess worship to monotheism? Yeah, okay. So we're going right to Genesis, and we have a story. And it says that Haran died in the lifetime of his father Terach in his native land, Ur, of the Chaldeans. So in the chat, who's Haran? I'm actually not seeing the chat, so I'm just going to give the answer because I don't know in this mode where to find it. Haran is the brother of Abraham. Terach, Abraham's father, has two sons, Haran and Abraham. Haran dies in his native land. So how does Haran die? So we're going to go now to a story, a midrashic story from the rabbis about how Haran dies. And it shows up in Breshit Rabbah. And I'm offering the text of the story, but the story goes like this, as described by Reb Chia in Breshit Rabbah in a rabbinic midrash coming much later. Terach, Abraham's father, was an idol maker. He once went away. He went on a journey, they say, to sell some idols, or who knows where he went. And a man came in and said, wished to buy one of his idols. Abraham says to the man, "How old are you?" And the man says, "I'm 50 years old." And Abraham says, "Whoa," to a man 50 years old who would worship a day-old object. So who's Abraham? Abraham is the original monotheist, right? From a very early age. On another occasion, a woman came in with a plate full of flour and requested him to take this and offer it to them. And he'd take the flour and give it to the idols. So Abraham took a stick and broke the idols and then put the stick in the hand of the largest one. When his father returned, when Terach returns, says, "What the heck have you done?" And Abraham says, "Father, I cannot conceal this from you. A woman came with a plate full of fine meal and requested me to offer to them. One of the idols claimed that I must eat first. Well, another claimed I must eat first. Thereupon the largest one took the stick and broke them." Terach responds, "What do you make sport of me? Have they any knowledge?" Terach says. "Should not your ears hear what your mouth said?" Abraham responds. Thereupon his father Terach seizes him and takes him to King Nimrod. Dun, 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 dun. And then Nimrod says, "Let us worship fire." And Abraham responds, "Let us worship water, which quenches fire." Abraham responds, "Let us worship water." Nimrod says, Abraham then says, "Let us worship the clouds, which bear the water." Then Nimrod responds, "Let us worship the clouds." Then Abraham says, "Let us worship the wind." And Nimrod responds, "Let us worship the wind." Abraham says, "Let us worship the human beings, which can stand up to the wind." Nimrod responds, "You are bandying with me, and we will worship nothing but the fire. Behold, I will cast you into it, and let your God, whom you adore, come and save you from it." Now Haran, Abraham's brother, was standing there not knowing, undecided, not knowing if he's a monotheist or a polytheist. So what does he do? Well, if Abraham wins, I'll go the monotheist route, and if Nimrod wins, then I'll be a polytheist. So Nimrod takes Abraham and throws him into the fire. He descends, and he was saved. He comes right back out, and that's the image that I pulled off the beautiful internet of Abraham emerging from the fire. God saves him, as the story goes. So then Nimrod goes to Haran, "Oh, whose belief are you?" And Haran's like, "Of Abraham's, of course." Thereupon Nimrod takes him, throws him into the fire, and Haran dies in the presence of his father Terach. So Reese says it's the first of many God showdowns. Any responses or thoughts to this story? Why am I sharing this story? This midrash? Jonathan?
Well, the rabbis have to account to the transition, either philosophically or culturally, from polytheism to monotheism.
Right.
They have to figure out how to tell the story in some way, because it's a gradual thing, and yet they got to make it real in terms of the story. And there's other dramatic parts of the story that I'll leave for other folks to talk about, but it's a great transitional story.
Right. So it's a story maybe the rabbis. So this story, I think, is a seminal tale constructed by the rabbis, as Reb Jonathan's saying, to explain, the nature of monotheism. However, I think it's also, it must be noted that the story comes much later, and it's a characterization of Abraham. But who is Abraham? And I want to go back to a story that I love to tell so much. I'm going to go back to my screen share. From Genesis 12. Vayavor Avraham be'eretz ad makom Shechem ad Alon Moreh. And Abram, before he's Abraham, he's Avram, passed to the land as far as the site of Shechem at the terebinth of Moreh. And so we teach this a lot because I think it's a really powerful and important piece of the Torah, that when the Torah speaks of Abraham's journey, this is in Lech Lecha. This is the 3rd chapter of the Torah when God comes to Abraham and says, leave home, Lech Lecha, leave your family and go and find your own way. And where is the first place that Avram and Sarai traveling together, where do they go? They go to Alon Moreh. Now, if you look at any traditional translation of Alon Moreh, it's either a place name or in English should be called the terebinth of Moreh. And most people don't know what a terebinth is. And certainly the word Moreh is never translated. But the word Moreh, who remembers what the word Moreh is in this context from a previous class or from their own studies? Sarah Lise, yeah.
It's teacher oak tree.
So Avram goes to the teacher oak tree. The terebinth is a funky name for a certain species of quercus, which is the oak family. And Moreh is stam, is a word for teacher. And so Abraham goes there, and there God appears to him and says, I will assign the land to you. And then Abraham builds an altar there to God who had appeared to him. So he builds an altar at the base of a tree. Why is this significant? Well, we're going to go into very soon the ancient roots of the relationship between worship and trees, which is sort of the context for the root of Hebraic feminine worship or goddess worship. And so I want to bring to your attention now, looking at these two stories. One is the story of the rabbis sort of looking at a transitional story, interpreting Abraham as a monotheist from the beginning. And this other story where Abraham, sure, speaking to God, but is also building an altar at a tree. And I have a wonderful text for you, very academic, but if you're interested in this topic, Susan Ackerman writes, under every green tree, popular religion in the 6th century, Judah. And this is her Harvard PhD lithograph. And she's going into like the reinterpretation of these tales. And what she's talking about fundamentally is this piece here. So the winners of history, namely the priests, prophets, and the Deuteronomic school, are all schools of men. They wrote a history that became the patriarchal forms of religion that persist through the rabbinic era today. Conversely, popular religion is characterized by what is actually going on by most of the people at the time in the place, is about the losers that probably held the majority and represented the mainstream of their day. The program that is called for here is rewriting of the history of the religion of Israel so as to take popular religion fairly into account. Why am I bringing Susan Ackerman up front here? And I'll say because the evidence that we have in the Torah, primarily, of polytheism and of goddess worship is in the form of polemics, meaning it's in the form of those who wrote the Torah, wrote the particular texts, kings significantly, the prophets significantly, and the book of Deuteronomy significantly, are writing polemics, meaning they are writing these in opposition to the popular religion at the time. And so it's very important just to understand that what we're going to see now as we go through the text, and we're not going to see it all because we don't have time for that, we're going to see evidence of this polytheistic worship, that it's being written from the framework of the victors, of the winners of history, namely the scribes and the prophets that were written about, who were all men and who are writing post facto or writing at a time of transition, as Reb Seidel said beautifully. I'm going to pause and go to the chat because I see a lot of action there. Idolatry Monotheism, I'm going to say the same thing. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole world. We're not going to get into all the nuances of panentheism, but we're sort of looking at broad strokes here. But this is very nuanced. Carlos Meza on Facebook says, Avram's bridge was built, a crossover of the first Hebrew. Agreed. They reach the right. They're each right for their own perspectives, and the idols are representations. Frank says, I have been accepting the idea of Gaian as the foundation of our faith. The God of the Bible was easier to tradition to, I'm not sure what you're saying there, but recently a Hasidic teaching on the side of bar of the prayer suggested that all things in the world is sacred. So I want to just take Frank's thing here and say the idea of Gaian as the foundation of our faith. And I want to say, yes, amen, very powerful thing to say. And I want to now invoke a dear teacher. I have a couple of pictures of him. Here's a picture of our dear teacher, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, Zichrono Livracha. And here's a picture of me and him saying hi to each other. Actually, in Ashland, Cerise, you're probably there. And the reason I'm putting up Reb Zalman now is because beloved teacher who understood what we were talking about and also called for specifically, Frank, what you are saying, is that the times that we're in, and the reason I'm so passionate about this is that we need to reframe our understanding of religion in general, but Judaism also specifically, to embrace at its core a Gaian consciousness. And in doing that, we don't need to necessarily act as if we're starting something new, but this is deeply embedded in the DNA, as you are saying, Frank, and that Gaian consciousness is very ancient and is already there. And we don't have time to go into all the ways that it shows up. We're just going to look at the transition from goddess. We're going to look at evidence of goddess worship and then the transition into patriarchy. So we're gonna that's all we're looking at. But then the rest of it is how that Gaian consciousness becomes imbued and hidden. It shows up in the mystical texts as the Shekhinah being in exile. It's sort of hidden in there. And it's sort of percolating under the surface. And although most of the women are written out of the texts, because again, the victors who are men are writing the history, it is showing up in many, many ways. And then it's showing up in our Hebrew calendar in the way we're honoring the moon cycles. Someone already said that. And it's showing up in the festivals. It's showing up in the way we relate to the elements and the fire relationship and the water and so many things we've already been talking about in the virtual village. So now on to Asherah. Susan Ackerman again in her introduction. Oh, sorry. I'm going to Tikva from Kensky. So another seminal work. I don't see it on my shelf right now, but another seminal work that if this is really exciting to you, In the Wake of the Goddess by Tikva Frimer-Kensky. And Tikva lays out in beautiful detail, like what's happening in the Sumerian pantheon and polytheistic worship, and how that sort of turns into the Canaanite and Hebraic worship, and how that's all happening synonymously and coterminously. And essentially, Hebrew worship is evolving out of the Levant, where everything is happening in a similar way. The language, religion, worship, the folk popular culture, It's hard to even distinguish until sort of the Hebrew lines emerge. And this is a lot of what Tikva Farmer-Kensky's work is. And she says, Asherah was real. She existed and she was tolerated in ancient Israel officially until about the 8th century. And we're going to look at that moment in the 8th century when things shifted. The official cult attacked and destroyed Asherah and the altars, but nevertheless, the people persisted in worshiping in the old style, drawing a reassurance of the divine input in nature, even as they were being told to be mindful of the human. So let's look into some places. King Solomon. King Solomon is the great king, son of King David, the second in line, and known to be one of the greatest kings, the most peaceful kings, famed for his wisdom, famed for his relationship to the natural world. And it says in Kings, Solomon loved many foreign women, and they say he had 1,000 wives. In addition to Pharaoh's daughter, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Phoenician, Hittite women. He had several hundred wives and concubines, and his wives turned his heart away, the Torah says. So now here we already see the polemic coming in, that his wives turned his heart away, which is another way of saying that he had all his wives, and he worshipped with them all of their gods and goddesses. That's really what they're saying. And the first temple, archaeologically speaking, we don't really have super concrete evidence, but there are many archaeologists that say that the first temple had many niches with many different deities coexisting inside the first temple. And I'm not saying that definitively because I haven't seen the concrete evidence of that, but many scholars speculate that was the case. In his old age, his wives turned away Solomon's heart after other gods, and he was not as wholeheartedly devoted to the God as his father David had been. Solomon followed Asherah, the goddess of the Phoenicians, and Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites, another deity. But very specifically, that Solomon, the great King Solomon, the greatest king, they say, was an Asherah worshiper. Stam, there it is, right there in Kings. The way that Asherah archaeologically appears, I have a couple images, but one is Asherah poles, and this is an image that is probably a replica from archaeological finds, that it's like the Asherah tree. There were actual trees where they built altars, and then the Asherah trees were these poles that have these feminine, very curvy images of divine spirit. The people, not just King Solomon, also built for themselves shrines, pillars, and sacred posts on every green hill, under every leafy tree. This is again referring to Asherah. Now we're looking at pre-8th century BCE, so earlier than the 8th century before the Common Era, and we don't really know how far back it goes, but we do know that not only, and I'm not going to go into all the different threads, but I'm focusing on Asherah because it's kind of the strongest evidence of polytheism and certainly of goddess worship. But we're also told, through the text that we're worshiping Baal, the storm god of Sumeria, and many, many other deities. The kings also had shrines facing Jerusalem to the south of the Mount of Destroyer. King Solomon built for Asherah and other deities articulated here. More polemical notes from Kings. The Israelites committed against their God acts which were not right. They built for themselves shrines in all their settlements, from watchtowers to fortified cities. They built up altars and sacred posts for themselves on every lofty hill and every leafy tree, and they offered sacrifices them at all the shrines, like the nations, like all the peoples whom God had driven into exile before them. And the beautiful, the prophets are also coming and railing against those who are worshiping Asherah and the other deities. In Jeremiah, a beautiful image. The children gather the sticks, the fathers build the fire, and the mothers knead the dough. to make cakes for the Queen of Heaven, and they pour libations to other gods to vex me. But here you have, like, it's right here in Jeremiah, the observation of one of the great prophets that, you know, the families are worshiping in this way. It's a popular folk religion where, you know, children are involved, the fathers are involved, and they're baking cakes to the Queen of Heaven. And, you know, many speculate the Queen of Heaven is Asherah again. Although the Queen of Heaven might connote other goddesses too, because there are other threads of other goddesses that we're worshiping. So I'm going to pause here. Malka or Sarah Elise, would you mind sharing the link to the Sapphire source sheet? There it is. Perfect. Okay. Thank you, Rabbi Jonathan, for sharing the title of Ackerman's book. And if you don't mind putting in Tikva Fermakensky's title too, that would be awesome. So I just want to pause here, sort of like we've seen like a little bit of the Torah and the polemics. We'll see more. We'll move away from Kings and go into Deuteronomy. And we have about 20 minutes left, I'm being reminded. So we're right on time. But any brief thoughts before we move on, you could drop them into the chat or you could raise your hand before we continue in. I have a lot more material that I want to get to, but I want to pause to make sure I'm not losing anyone or if anyone has something they really want to say. Adi.
Hi. I just wanted to say that, you know, I don't think that there's a lack of acknowledgement of polytheism from biblical writers. And for me, what's coming up is we want so much there to be this male-female duality, right? And I feel like we're kind of calling in the physical manifestations of the feminine. And I feel like that's fine. And there's, you know, that's certainly valid. But like when you kind of reach back to monotheism, I feel like a lot of the problems come up around it. When we think of monotheism, we think of male monotheism and not gender neutral monotheism, if that makes sense. Like all of our God language is very masculine in form, so we're crying for this kind of feminine balance to that, when that is really kind of a dual thing. And when you're looking more toward monotheism, it is that kind of like Ein Sof or sort of this bigger non kind of that aspect.
Thank you, Adi. This is a beautiful point that you're making. And I think that if we're looking back into the monotheism of ancient Israel that's forming, you know, that's really taking hold very strongly in the 8th century BCE, it is a masculine monotheism very explicitly. We are turning towards male domination, and we're going to look at that. And we're going to look at those moments, and this is kind of the crux of this session. And I completely agree with you. And how I would respond to you is when people ask me, are you advocating for Jewish tradition to return back to biblical ways, you know, with certain kinds of rituals or, you know, reclaiming the goddess in certain ways? And I would say absolutely not. I don't believe that at all. Rather, what I believe is that we need to honor the entirety of our actual history and mythology, and as well as the rabbinic tradition, the beautiful, rich. I love the Talmud, although it's it's admittedly a patriarchal project, you know. But we have to take the ancient history, the more recent history, the modern period, and we integrate and transcend. And what you're saying is so beautiful in that part of that integration is taking the feminine and the masculine feminine duality, and then acknowledge, as you're saying, that it's not actually about the duality. It's not about one or the other. And this is, I think, the Aquarian consciousness that we're evolving into. It's bringing these all together and looking at the whole spectrum. You know, Reb Zalman would say that about all the religions. You know, Judaism cannot stand alone and think it's somehow the religion. We have to acknowledge that we are one religion amongst many, like the organs of a body, for example. The same thing goes for peoples. You know, right now we're in an emergent civil rights movement for Black lives. It's powerful, and I think it's the similar phenomenon that it's not about you know, us or them. It's about us all acknowledging Black lives, uplifting Black lives, so that we can go to the day where we can actually say without actually being wrong, you know, in the sense that all lives matter. But right now we can't say that because Black lives are oppressed. And I think it's very much the same thing, that in a way we're looking now at the feminine roots of goddess worship in our tradition, which are very strong, and that was oppressed and taken away, and now we have to uplift that. And someone said earlier, there's a feminine energy rising in the world today, in Judaism today, and absolutely more female rabbis, female identified people are being ordained than male identified people, as well as a much growing number of transgender and gender fluid and queer, the entire spectrum of people are embracing the rabbinate and are being embraced by the people. So it's happening, and it's definitely not done. It's definitely not done. And that's why I think this is so important. So thank you, Adi. I hope that was a worthy response. All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to continue on into the text. Okay, we're looking at the... So now we have apologies. Okay, so now we have the turning point. And Tikva is going to talk about this. The diminution of the role of the goddess in cultural affairs is one aspect of a progressively intensifying process in which the goddess became ever more marginalized. So what she's saying is that as women in the cultures become marginalized, the rise of the monarchy, the goddess becomes marginalized as well. But throughout these changes, one factor remained constant. Culture continued to be ascribed to male and female powers, even as the balance became ever more skewed towards the male. So we're struggling with that duality and that balance. The diminishing role of the goddess thereby in itself served as a paradigm for the recession of women. Or maybe not the recession of women, but maybe the oppression of women. And since the paradigm of male monopolizing was the projected on the divine sphere, it both modeled and provided sacred warrant for the ongoing cultural displacement of women. And I would say of queer people, because the pantheon wasn't just black and white, male, female, even way back when. And that's a nuance that we won't go deeply into, but I want to just frame this up. And so there are two reforms, two revolutionary moments. The first is Hezekiah's reform. And I think it was Cerise threw this in the chat earlier. Thank you for that. Spot on. The 13th king of Judah reigned in the very end of the 7th century BCE, the beginning of the 8th century BCE. And in Kings, we are described that King Hezekiah abolished the shrines and smashed the pillars and cut down the sacred posts. He broke into pieces the bronze serpent of Moses. For until that time, Israelites had been offering sacrifices to it. Now, it didn't work. it's evidence that the popular culture was so strong that King Manasseh, the sixth, I think the 14th king, comes and rebuilds the shrines that his father Hezekiah had destroyed, and re-erects altars to Baal, and Asherah probably as well. And he bows down to them and worships them. So then it's not till another 100 years later, almost 100 years later, that the second reform, Josiah's reform. Now, the Josiah's reform is particularly unique and powerful in that in this image I'm showing you that there is a scroll discovered. And there's much intrigue on what that scroll was. The high priest Hilkiah said to the scribe Shaphan, "I have found a scroll of the teaching in the house of God." And Hilkiah, the priest, gave the scroll to Shaphan, who read it. Now I'm going to exclude you, Reb Seidel, if you're still here, from this question. Does anyone have a shot at what that scroll was? Pat, what was that scroll?
Deuteronomy.
Yeah. So speculation, nice, you nailed it. Speculation is, and probably spot on, that it was the book of Deuteronomy. Now I want to pause here and say, wait a minute. The book of Deuteronomy gives us the Shema. The book of Deuteronomy gives us values around Shemitah and Yovel and some of the most powerful human rights teachings in the entire 5 books of Moses. Rabbi Shai Held from Mechon Hadar has a whole thing about Deuteronomy as like the social justice map for Judaism. So it's really fascinating that while Deuteronomy is offering us a map for unity consciousness in the Shema and the Ve'ahavta and all these pieces, it's also being used to consolidate God worship, remove the pantheon, and consolidate power in the monarchy. So this is a paradox that we are not going to solve today. I would love to hear Jonathan's opinion about that, but I think we're gonna move on because I don't have time. But I might come to you later and talk to you about this because I am holding questions about that. And Rev Jonathan is probably more learned on these things than I am, so you could probably be teaching a whole version of his class that we might come to one day, God willing, soon. So then the king ordered the high priest Hilkiah and the guards to bring out all the temple objects made for Baal and Asherah and all the host of heaven, and they burned them outside in the fields of Kidron, outside of the Jerusalem, and they removed the ashes. He suppressed the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had appointed, and more than suppressed them, they murdered hundreds, if not thousands of them. They brought out the image of Asherah from the house of God to the Kidron Valley outside of Jerusalem and burned it. And this was like a mass. I'm sorry, I'm not sharing screen. Thank you. There we are. I apologize for that. Thank you for reminding me. Just flipping back. We are in Kings 2, chapter 23. And this is describing, what happened. Like they tore apart, all really destroyed, the house of Baal, the house of Asherah, and many, many other aspects of the polytheistic worship that had been going on. Now, the book of Deuteronomy, which Pat named, claims itself to be from the time of Moses. So here is another rewriting, imputing history into a text. These are the words of Moses spoke to all of Israel. That's the first line of Deuteronomy. Yet scholars agree it was composed around the 7th century BCE. Deuteronomy was composed many centuries after Moses, closer to the time when it was discovered in the temple by Hezekiah. This is Jeffrey Teague, who is a very well-respected scholar on Deuteronomy. So, Deuteronomy, what does it say? It says, you must destroy all the sites at which the nations you are to dispossess, whether on lofty mountains and on hills or on any luxuriant tree. Tear down the altars, smash the pillars, put their sacred their posts to the fire, cut down the images of their God, obliterating their name from that site. And this is an image of the Kodesh Kodeshim, the Holy of Holies in the temple. But look only to the site that God will choose amongst all your tribes as his habitation to establish his name there. There you are to go, and there you are to bring your burnt offerings and those sacrifices, your tithes and your contributions, your free will offerings, the first of your flocks. And Moshe Weinfeld, another very respected scholar, says Josiah's reform, the second revolution, was mainly concerned with centralizing worship in the Jerusalem temple. All outlying shrines were ordered dismantled and destroyed. This centralization of the cult in Jerusalem was itself a sweeping innovation of revolutionary proportions. I'm going to pass this text. I'm going to go now. So we just got a taste of the 7th century BCE, this revolution where all of Asherah was destroyed. Archaeologists find remnants now of, the many figurines and parts of the poles, much has been recovered and discovered. So there is plenty of archaeological evidence of the text is playing out what happened in the Levant. And so I want to just pause. And, for me, when I first learned of this, my blood boiled and I was really like outraged. And I wanted to, scream at my ancestors and say, the temple. And now I have this F the temple and all that kind of stuff. And the sacred fire, that Zelig talks about, wait a minute, that's like a patriarchal thing. And now I want to rail against the whole project. And so I want to invite you to do so if that's what you're called to do. And I want us to consider the the socio-political climate, the history of what was happening, and why Josiah and Hezekiah, why they made these moves. Was it just because they were evil? Was it because they were just power hungry? Perhaps. But it's also true that in that time, the kingdom of Judah was facing great difficulty. The kingdom is divided by now. Encroaching tribes are threatening, and there is a very serious need to consolidate, to protect, and there's the impulse to, another survival strategy. So I want to just name, Cerise is putting a nice thing in the chat here. William Devers, extensive archaeology and writing, Did God Have a Wife? Some of the most in-depth on Asherah. Very important book. William Dever, another one for your library. Thank you, Cerise, for pointing out all these great things. And so I just want to see the multiple perspectives. And also, if when Reb Zalman and I talked about these things, he would always step back from the personal, from the sort of, and see that we are really speaking about the shifting of cosmological time and the way that humans are playing out the energies that are coming. And so it's both. And it's also true that the folk religion and the people have been, oppressed, destroyed, and that these goddess worshiping ways were buried. And so there is an impulse to then ask the question: what is for us to do in this time when it's clear that the feminine power is awakening? In fact, the hope and prayer is that all those powers that have been oppressed and suppressed are awakening, so that we can all, God willing, come into harmony one day. And that is actually what Reb Zalman's Gaian vision is. It's not just about going back to the earth. It's about the time when all religions work together in a circle, that all beings are in harmony. This is the messianic consciousness that our forefathers and foremothers talk about. Mashiach, the Messiah, isn't a person. We tried that a few times, didn't work. The messianic consciousness, Mashiach, is a consciousness, and one might use the beautiful wordplay of Hebrew to see the word siach, conversation, inside of Mashiach, and that is the great conversation of all beings coming into harmony. So we look back on these oppressive past and we mourn, and then we ask ourselves, how can we become better? Well, I want to, Susan asked the question, but isn't part of it about going back to the earth? Yes, absolutely. It is about going back to the earth as a doorway into a new paradigm. And that's what the work of Wilderness Torah. We take Judaism back to the earth, and we take Jewish people back to the earth, as well as all peoples. All peoples are welcome and uplifted. And in fact, it's wonderful when we have more than just Jewish people in those spaces, because then we see how when we go back to the earth, something else emerges. A deeper truth emerges from ourselves as individuals. Something more transformational happens as communities. And Amy Kaplan says beautifully, a doorway to go back to who we really are. Absolutely. That is the teachings of, Judaism and the wilderness, that in the wilderness we find the gift. So if you want to learn about that, go back and see the class I offered about wilderness in the Jewish mind. It's about the wilderness as the place where we go to, in threshold moments in our lives, to receive the matana. Because it says from midbar to matana, as Numbers describes, from the wilderness, the gift. You can't receive the inherent God-given gifts that you've been given by being constantly in humanity alone. We have to go and be just with ourselves, with God in the natural world. The natural world are the garments of God. So it's just us and that. So yes, we must return back to the earth. That is part of this. And the Gaian consciousness also transcends the Gaian consciousness. So I want to just name one more piece about how this move away from goddess worship and polytheism into patriarchy, monarchy, into monarchy and the patriarchy, and how it gets kind of solidified. and what we're up against now, and the knot that we have to untie. And I'm going to jump over now a lot of history, about 2,000 years of history, and go right to the Rambam. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, Maimonides, the Rambam, a 13th century medieval scholar, physician, sage, great rabbi. He writes the Mishnah Torah from Spain, and he himself, along with his family, very connected to many Arab and Moorish families, is run out during the Inquisitions that happened in Spain. So he's in a time of great transition and turmoil. But he writes the Mishnah Torah, and one of the things he does is he and it's a lot to share, but he writes the first entire comprehensive code of Jewish law. No majority, minority opinions. It's just like the rules. Big, in this huge volume. It's the first time it ever happened. Judaism was never meant to be that way. It was always an evolving, living, breathing tradition. And Maimonides comes along, one of the greatest rabbis ever, and for some, one of the least liked because of the move he made. And he creates the first kind of like pin in rule-driven Judaism, the halakha. And part of what he did was related to how we relate to things that aren't specifically tied to the one God. So in Leviticus, for example, it says, you shall not practice divination or soothsaying. It's sort of open and vague. And then the Rambam comes along and like gets really, really detailed. It is forbidden to practice divination as the idolaters do. And he goes into all these different ways. And he goes so far as to actually prohibit even just worshiping under a tree at all, for fear that tree may have been used as an Asherah. And there's a lot of information here. You can go into it yourself in the Svarya source sheet. I'm not going to have time to go into all of it. But what he says is that Maimonides, and this is now Moshe Harbatal commenting on Maimonides. It's another great book if you're interested in medieval thought and what Maimonides did, his revolution in the medieval period. But Maimonides, in effect, transitions rational activity into halakhic obligation for the first time. A person is required to examine whether his motives for taking or avoiding some action are guided by natural causal considerations that rest in sound theory. And in particular, the laws concerning idolatry go way beyond the theological innovation and in effect a revolution in the most fundamental aspects of Jewish life. And to bring this class full circle and to conclude, in the beginning book of the Mishnah Torah, the Rambam, in Sefer Hamadah, like the book of ideas, he begins with the story of Haran and Terach and Abraham, and uses it as a proof text of monotheism to bring the whole thing full circle. The bedrock of the Mishnah Torah, which becomes that codified instruction manual for how to walk through the world, which then sets a new standard for what halakha becomes going forward all the way till today, is based in the assumption that Abraham was a monotheist from the beginning and completely disappears this entire history of polytheism and feminine worship in the goddess. And I think it's important for us all to understand that. Also understand the profound gifts that come with the Rambam as well as Deuteronomy, but begin to integrate how do we unpack these things, and then to really explore the impulses that we have, as have been spoken many times in the chat and in this class, about the awakening feminine that we see around us, within us, so we can honor and uplift that, and then innovate, not to reject Judaism. That's not my goal, but to integrate, include, and then move into the next paradigm as our teacher, beloved Reb Solomon taught. And so with that, little bit of a whirlwind hour through from goddess worship to patriarchy and the monotheistic revolution. I hope you learned something today. And thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Zelig. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Elise. I'm here from the Wilderness Tour team, and I wanted to say thank you all for showing up today. So grateful to be in virtual community with you all. We'll be closing our week out tomorrow with music as meditation, Near Eastern practices with Eliyahu Sills. So that's tomorrow morning at 11 a.m. Pacific. And as well, we have postponed our Wilderness Torah and Urban Adamah biweekly Kabbalat Shabbat in order to co-sponsor and uplift Bechol Lashon, a Black-led Kabbalat Shabbat to commemorate Juneteenth, a holiday celebrating Black liberation, which is tomorrow, and it's featuring Rabbi Sandra Lawson and Isama Goldstein Stoll. It'll be happening at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern, and you can find more details on our newsletter, which will be coming out, and on our website very soon. You'll need to register for that event, so make sure you sign up for that. As the month of June comes to a close and we prepare to slow down our virtual village offerings, please consider sharing this experience with others. You can tell your friends and family around the world about Virtual Village, invite people to events on Facebook, or share the recording of today's class after we post it next week. My peer Malka will insert the links in the Zoom chat to our website and donation page if you feel called to support this work deeper. We appreciate all donations, big and small. As well, you can fill out our survey and let us know how we can support you more in connecting with Wilderness Torah and each other. Thank you so much, Zelig. It's such an honor, as always, to learn with you. And blessings. Have a beautiful day. I'll pass it back to you for closing words.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be with everyone. I feel fired up because the room seems fired up. And I just want to put my email address in here if you don't have it. Instead of open to dialogue and sharing resources. This class was based on the first half of my master's thesis, which I hope to soon, in the next year or two, turn into my first book. So stay tuned. And just thank you for your interest and your passion and your open-heartedness for the return to the Gaian consciousness. And in particular, in this moment, the Gaian consciousness is speaking about Black lives right now. And so that's the part we need to be listening to and focusing on. So I wish you a Shabbat Shalom and happy Juneteenth tomorrow. And may we all see how this piece of the greater puzzle, as we focus on it, is so critical and also helps us see the greater whole at the same time. So wishing you all the best and much, much gratitude.
Blessings all. Have a beautiful day. Closing out the Zoom room now. Bye, friends.
Bye-bye.